Good evening and welcome everybody, this is Obi-Wan Pez for Simplex Pachinko. We are doing some math discussion tonight, so if you have any particular kinds of questions, any thoughts on math education, if you have any thoughts on any particular type, or any particular books, mathematical philosophers, mathematical psychologists, anything like mathematical, educational philosophers and educational psychologists, anything like that, feel free to drop that into chat. Feel free to engage in the conversation and all that good stuff. I believe I had kept a bunch of my educational philosophy stuff intentionally. I had a wonderful professor who was a doctoral candidate, I think, at the University of New Hampshire. I, for the life of me, cannot find him anywhere. So I don't know if he is under a different name now, or, yep, just kind of disappeared. And then one of my colleagues, who was a first-year master's student. Sorry, I need to turn that down. That's better. One of my colleagues in that particular class is now living in California doing some completely different stuff that's like not even related to education. And she and I always had like really intense one-on-one conversations whenever we were doing our like think, pair, share kind of things. But then we'd like stop, and we were on the same side of whatever, pretty much everything. We both had a lot of thoughts about any of the readings that were given to us, and like we spent extra time talking with our professor. But yeah, I kind of lost touch with both of them. It's too bad. Yeah, so like I said, I have a bunch of my educational philosophy stuff, but I unfortunately do not remember which particular notebook it's all stuffed into. That's data mining. That's masters. Oh, goodness. But I feel like I should at least try to find some of it, because I have, and on top of that, like, nobody's here, so anybody who's watching the VOD, I do apologize. Oops. Ah, interesting. My entire bookshelf is now leaning quite far. Ooh, functions of a complex variable and PDEs. Not relevant for tonight, but definitely something I want to revisit. So we do have a few books that I do keep next to here. It's been 20 plus years since I've read any of these. And with the condition of the spine on this one, possibly at all. Oops. But, no, I think I've read it. I just didn't make any notes, which is really sad. I had a thing against, like, writing in my actual books, because, oh, maybe I'll resell it or something. I was never going to resell the ones that actually mattered. Okay, so, we have Howard Gardner's Intelligence Reframed. This one mostly deals with, at least in the beginning here, about like how do we define intelligence in the first place anyway, and how can we then maybe move toward a more modern take rather than like all of the weird stuff that we came up with in the 20th century, especially surrounding the eugenics movement. And this is, at this point, this is probably fairly significantly outdated, but at the same time, like, trying to understand if anybody has, you know, done any serious thinking about educational philosophy, this would be an instrumental book to discuss, like, where we are in the year 1999. I bought this book probably in 2003, give or take, for educational psychology, I think. So it was by no means a new, like, super new book, but at the same time, it kind of got to the crux of the idea, minus a few years of new papers and things like that, as far as like where do we stand on intelligence, and maybe let's update it for the new millennium. Right. I mean, let's just go through a couple of chapter headings here, right? Intelligence and individuality before multiple intelligences, so assuming that we had only one real intelligence, and that was perfectly acceptable to be like IQ stuff. And again, IQ is... Hey, Zach! Blurt might be a little high. It's alright. It wakes me up. Hey, Cesar. Thank you so much. Brown belt and Kempo. Nice. Yep. So our Tang Su Do style doesn't allow weapon training until after black belt. I think first degree. So he doesn't, you know, you don't have to be like really far along. But yeah, they were kind of like, well, if you want to train it like on the side, we can do something, but we're not going to do it in class. That's for like black belt classes. Also reduces the number of injuries. So yeah, we have before multiple intelligences, like almost always discussing the idea of IQ. Most modern psychological reviews on IQ would say that's not valid. It doesn't. It measures it discusses more about the examiner than it does about the the test maker and the what is a valid test? Right, so it says more about the test maker than it does about the test taker, which is really not a good test. Which sometimes was the case in some of my math classes. Most of the time, only my, when I was teaching it for the first time. Yeah, I hated writing exams. I wrote a decent one for building thinking classrooms, but it was insane. Like, the students didn't know what to do with it. Some of them tried to do all the questions. I'm like, no, that's nope. You're not gonna make it. Don't do that. Like, do the level you think you're. We'll talk about later, but yeah, do the level you think you're appropriate at. Like, you're PCMI. I don't think so. I have not been keeping up on literature for quite a while. Mostly going to conferences was my, like, big, let's review the literature. But I would sometimes go, well, whenever I got a copy of Mathematic Educator, that was mostly where I was, like, getting most of my updates from. I was with NCTM for a while, and therefore have, like, a shelf, probably 2 of all of these other ones. Teacher Leadership Program. Nope. Hadn't heard about it. The theory of multiple intelligence is a personal perspective. So, what is Howard Gardner's perspective on seeing multiple intelligences and realizing that, the current model is inadequate. Are there additional intelligences? Is there a moral intelligence? Myths and realities about multiple intelligences, issues and answers regarding multiple intelligences, intelligences of creators and leaders, multiple intelligences in the schools, multiple approaches to understanding, multiple intelligences in the wider world, and who owns intelligence. So this is also going to start delving into some of the, like, this is kind of the precursor stuff to trying to understand like cultural bias, and trying to understand, like, where do we draw the line in terms of, like, what is considered intelligence and not within our society, and who gets to decide that. So it gets into some pretty deep philosophical stuff. I have proposed a set of several intelligences, each resting on its own neurological substrate, each of which can be nurtured and channeled in specific ways depending on a particular society's values. I have listed criteria for an intelligence and shown how these can be evoked in evaluating potential new intelligences, but where does one draw the line? Are my criteria the right ones? In the future, the new dimensions and boundaries of intelligence will likely be thrashed out on a pivotal battlefield. Now that the scala of psychometricians has been overcome, we risk succumbing to the Charybdis of anything goes, emotions, morality, and creativity all being absorbed into the new intelligence. The challenge is to chart a concept of intelligence that reflects new discoveries and understandings, and yet can withstand scrutiny. So then we start getting into some of the concepts right at the end of like connecting intelligences to values and trying to do a somewhat values-based education and trying to leverage the concept of like cultural values. What do we actually want of our students? What do we want to teach? And making that kind of our prime directive, if you will. And keeping in mind, this is 26 years ago that this came out, so, I mean, it's not like we figured it all out yet. And last paragraph in the book, I'll give you that one. The humanist of classical times said, "Nothing human is alien to me, and the saga of individual consciousnesses cannot be reduced to formulas or generalizations. Here we connect to multiple human intelligences. Granted only our species membership, we are fundamentally alike. Factoring in each person's unique genetic blueprint, we become capable of achieving different potentials, and our different family and cultural milieus ensure that we will eventually become distinct human beings. Because our genes and our experiences are unique, and because our brains must figure out meanings, no two selves, no two consciousnesses, no two minds are exactly alike. Each of us is therefore situated to make a unique contribution to the world. In the recognition of our individuality, we may discover our deepest common tie, that we are all joint products of natural and cultural evolution, and we may discover why we must join forces in a complementary but synergistic way to make sure that nature and culture survive for generations." We also got The Challenge to Care in Schools by Noddings. An alternative approach to education. I also changed the resolution on the screen, so if this is like awful, it's because I tried increasing the resolution and then like downscaling the picture. So quite possibly, if you can't read the small print, that's the reason. So Nell Noddings wrote about this in 1992. No. Put that the wrong way around. But, Again, I got this in 2003-ish. Advances in Contemporary Educational Thought, Volume 8. So, in this... Dr. Noddings suggests that in or after World War II, there were obviously massive cultural changes, but the problem is that we still didn't really change a whole lot in terms of our education. The typical classroom that we were looking at is effectively and realistically from 1992 until I stopped teaching in 2024, like, well, 2023, I guess. Also didn't really change all that much. We're effectively still working off of the old ideology of the Industrial Revolution, where we are trying to churn out students as a product, or educated students as a product, given the raw materials of the students who come in to our particular courses, and we're trying to do a one-size-fits-all assembly line job where an individualized take is absolutely necessary for every individual student. You know, as Gardner said, we are all individuals. There is... Is it 1957 or 2018? Yes. Right, so methods of instruction have largely ignored massive social change. And not for nothing, but like even the teachers who were giving out these books and having us discuss them in the classes and all that stuff tended to not be able to change our habits into something better, into like attempting to get our teaching practices to change. We would sit around the classroom and, you know, opine about all of these wonderful things that we could do, but once we actually got into a classroom, it was like, okay, first of all, we're getting beat over the head by our liaisons, or you know, the people who are running the show, administration or our department chairs, and like, here's how you teach a class, and they kind of try to mold us into the exact same thing they've been doing for decades and decades. It's probably one of the reasons that I did not mesh very well in these classes. I did not end up staying in the public schools. If I went back now, I suspect I would have a much better job. That I would be able to go out there and be like, hey, here is the way that I'm teaching, and it is wildly different, and I might have to go back to middle school in order to somewhat do it effectively, just because, you know, high school students are really set in their ways and want specific things. So if you try to change the culture on them, they're going to be like, no, this is not cool. That being said, right, if you try to change ninth graders, administrators are resistant to change too. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like my department chair in the Baltimore area absolutely did not want me to do anything very significantly different, but at the same time it was like, you know, here's what I want you to do, and tried to lay out this thing, and I'm like, this is just not me. Like, I can't do this. I can't just jump up here and be like, hey, let me tell you, realistically, what she wanted was a series of activities which, in theory, could have worked better than what I was doing. Probably would have worked better than what I was doing, but at the same time, A, it's not me, and B, it ends up being like the students are not paying attention, they're not interested, they're off doing their own thing, and I'm 24, I don't have any significant classroom control. And again, I'm almost 43 now, it would be a very different ballgame. I think it would be much more doable from my perspective. And especially if I just jumped into, what I do now with or what I did a year ago, with the Liljedahl stuff. We'll get to it. Like, the administrators might have hated it. The students would definitely hate it at the very beginning. But once a significant number of them started understanding, like, oh, I'm understanding this at a much deeper level than I was before, then this is where we start getting the traction to say, this is what we're doing now, and look, I have numbers here. This is how it used to be. This is how it is now. Compare and contrast. Let's do some data science on these grades that I've anonymized. I'd say my grades were not necessarily significantly different when I was doing building thinking classrooms, but the problem was with me, not with the system itself. I'm pretty sure. It was my first time doing it for real for a full semester, so like, it's gonna be bad. There was also stuff that, like, I'm not good at, like, journaling, that kind of stuff, so that would have gone better had I done a better job of doing that. Many of us oppose the behavioral objectives movement. Eisner, 1969. I remember vividly my first encounter with this way of thinking. I was listening to students in my homeroom study for a history test. They all had questions and were coaching each other on the answers. Oh dear, I thought, these kids, good kids, some of my best math students, had got a hold of the test. They were cheating. But no, happily, it was not so. Their teacher had bought into the behavioral objectives criterion referenced testing idea that said, here's what you're going to be tested on, go learn it. Was this an enlightened new way of teaching? On one level, it sounded sensible. If you want kids to learn, for goodness sake, tell them what they're expected to do. First, make sure you know what they're going to do, then tell them. It seemed a lot fairer and easier than the method my own teachers had used. When we asked what would be on the upcoming test, the usual answer was, everything. I've never done that. Oh no. Ungrading. Yes, one of my colleagues also did that. I should get... Hang on. Oh, please tell me I did not just hit call. No, okay. Sorry. Anyway. As a counterpoint to behaviorism, what about when your test is an unknown, such as COVID coming into the world in 2020? Yeah. Certainly, that put all of the, like, healthcare teams, right? That put them to the test. So, we saw that there was a massive collapse in the system, mostly in that, you know, politicians are in charge of putting people in charge of response, instead of saying, like, hey, why don't you all you awesome science people, work on figuring out who should be in charge of you. You know, get a career scientist in charge of the NIH, like there was. And then, you know, oi. Like, all of... We'll get to another book later on in this stack here. Where it's all about power structures and how to discuss all of that and try to get people to shift shift discussions all about, you know, education onto, like, how are we going to change large-scale power structures. And it's not easy. Obviously, we would have done it already. Understanding by design. Put these over here. Performance assessment. Yep. I mean, that's honestly, that was sort of where my philosophy 101 teacher went. The final exam was your wife and child have been kidnapped, or yeah, your child has been kidnapped, and the kidnappers have demanded that you don't go to the cops, and like all this other stuff. What do you do, and under which philosophical framework do you do that? I basically, a bunch of people took kind of one thing and they went on it, and they were just like, I'm doing this because of this, and like that is my moral philosophy. And I was like, I mean, here are my options. It, like, not a real performance assessment in that, you know, I had no family at that point to be kidnapped. But for freshman philosophy, right? But in saying, here are my options, and here's why, you know, what under what frameworks each of these work, and why I would feel justified in selecting any one of them. Um, I I got an A on that one, and in the whole class entirely. He was the same teacher who did my spouse and I took together a computer power and human reason class, which was a lot like yeah, yeah. And I mean, it was 2002, so he'd probably been using the same assessment for 15 years at that point. Um, and yeah, he was the same teacher for computer power and human reason, which was philosophy 431 or something like that, which was a freshman level philosophy class which counted toward your technology requirement. And you could, it was basically read a bunch of Asimov, Bradbury, and like, you know, 1,000 other authors that I don't remember who they are because there's just so many science fiction authors out there. And like discuss, I mean, this is kind of what led the two of us both together, I think, to take neural networks in graduate school. Decode a non-base 10 time system, convert it to base 10 time system, planning a movie marathon. Interesting. Third semester thought it was meh. Oh. What was the... Was it just the group of students? Was it like different generation ways of thinking, or is it just those particular students?
Whether you're relaxing at home or out and about, make your music move with you. With Premium, you can download your music at higher quality, listen to songs ad-free, and play them in any order.
Right, so, chapters in this one are shallow educational response to deep social change, caring, just generally, beyond the disciplines, a critique of liberal education. So in here, and again, liberal in the sense that we're covering a lot of different topics instead of like you will focus on one particular thing. I tend to think of the in the apolitical sense, a conservative education more as like you are getting job training. Like you don't need to know all this other stuff. You just do job training. And I tend to not like that too much just because I know that I ended up seeing all sorts of weird disparate connections between things that I was actually studying and trying to do. And this is especially true for, like, education, right? You need to know stories outside of your discipline. You know, you can start connecting the dots between all sorts of allegedly disparate areas and teaching your particular subject area. So I am grateful for my very broad education, in the sense that, like, I have a lot of shallow knowledge about a ton of different subjects, and this also includes, you know, my mother being a nurse, helped get me into being an EMT for 4 years, and just having interest in medical knowledge generally. And then I also, because my father was a woodworker, he did it semi-professionally, and then, like, when he switched jobs to do something else, he did it professionally, keeping his skills up, doing interesting stuff with, you know, the table saw and routers and lathes and all this other cool stuff. He built the bed that they sleep in to this day. Like, he did that in 1990 or something like that. It was well, might have been for their 10th anniversary. So somewhere, you know, somewhere in that area. Around when Noddings wrote this book. So yeah, I think it was like maybe their 5th. So it was somewhere between 5th and 10th anniversary. He made them a bed that they still to this day sleep in. So I mean, like, that is the dedication to which my father understands and is good with woodworking. He still does some to this day, because he now has a handyman business up in New Hampshire. I totally stole his trademark name when I did a couple of stream episodes way early on. At the college level, liberal education has long been considered the proper education for a gentleman, and more recently, gentlewoman. At the pre-college level, where our attention will be concentrated, it comprises the usually prescribed courses for college prep. It's interesting, though. She does state, first, I will argue that liberal education is an inappropriate ideal for general education because it draws on only a narrow set of human capacities. Hence, prescribing it for all students ensures inequality of outcomes. Second, I will argue that current political rationales for a single-track liberal arts curriculum are misguided, and that in any case educational programs need educational rationales as well as political ones. Third, I will suggest that the content of liberal studies is not the content that all children need. I will argue that content suggested by my earlier discussion of caring is far more appropriate. Finally, I will look at popular arguments against tracking and show that they suffer from difficulties similar to those raised by rationales for universal liberal education. Springfield, Missouri. I never went there. That's weird. Maybe because you were getting tired of teaching. Yeah. Or that particular class, yeah. I think I'm going to have to read much more into this one because there are some nuances to this that I have not... I must have forgotten over the last 20 some odd years. Quote, surely academic mathematics is not essential for everyone, not even for all college-bound students. Ma'am, you wound me. Yep, gonna need to read more on that later. Then we have The Teaching Gap, Best Ideas from the World's Teachers for Improving Education in the Classroom by Stigler and Hiebert. This one, I think, mostly focusing on the fact that there are kind of two disparate cultures of education. You have people who are getting good education because that's where the money is, and you have people who are getting not so good education because that's not where the money is, and due to the fact that the teachers in those positions also don't get the same opportunities. Yeah. Wildly different class sizes contributing to the inability to teach equally to two groups of students, not to mention the other 50,000 things that are wrong. This one is from comparing math teaching practices in Japan and Germany with those in the United States. Two leading researchers offer a surprising new view of teaching and a bold action plan for improving education inside the American classroom, circa 1999. I'm sure they approve. The Jameses, Stigler and Hiebert. Again. discussing... Oh, you know what? I probably got this one in my math education class rather than teaching philosophy. But the nature of learning, cultural beliefs about learning in both Japan and the United States. Looking at... looking at the table of contents, we have the teaching gap, so in other words, what is it? Methods for studying teaching in Germany, Japan, and the United States. Images of teaching, refining the images. Teaching is a system. Teaching is a cultural activity. Beyond reform, Japan's approach to the improvement of classroom teaching. Setting the stage for continuous improvement. The steady work of improving teaching. And the true profession of teaching. So let's just zip back here real quick. Right, so we get into the learning gap as well, which is what are all of the different classroom issues on the student side that then impact learning and cause disparities between two otherwise equal groups of students. There's, again, a huge number of variables at play, and when you start talking about intersectionality and the multiple individual issues which then start stacking on top of each other. So we have the cultural issue of, for instance, women in STEM being either bullied and harassed by their peers or made fun of. The cultural image that, you know, and this is changing, but it was significantly worse back in early 2000s, late 90s. Cultural stigma of women in STEM, and then you start getting into also disparities of racial background, disparities of nationality, and then when you start talking about, for instance, women of color from the United States, especially in STEM, then the situation starts compounding. Alright, ads are going to come up in about 5 minutes. So, looking back over what we have studied from the TIMS video study, several things stand out. We foreshadowed these things because they form the basis of this book. Teaching, not teachers, is a critical factor. Americans focus on the competence of teachers. They decry the quality of applicants for teaching positions and criticize the talent of the current teaching corps, but we come away with a different conclusion. Although variability in competence is certainly visible in the videos we collected, such differences are dwarfed by the differences in teaching methods we see across cultures. In chapters 2, 3, 4, we present the analyses of teaching and describe what teaching looks like in each of the countries. We've watched many examples of good teachers employing limited methods that, no matter how competently they're executed, could not lead to high levels of student achievement. Although there are teachers using extraordinary methods in all cultures, the extraordinary is not what defines most students' classroom experiences. Students' day-to-day experiences are mainly determined by the methods most commonly used by the teachers within a culture. Cross-cultural differences within these commonly used methods are what we have termed the teaching gap. We can see clearly that American mathematics teaching is extremely limited, focusing on the most part for a narrow band of procedural skills. This is something that Zach and I have talked about at length in many different videos. So it is super, super important that we are not specifically teaching individual limited skills which will eventually just break down because the student does not know what they're doing. If we get something that is ever so slightly different, they'll panic. And as Zach said a while ago, if you do an assessment that is more based on like an actual skill that you would need in the field. So, for instance, I could say that I want you to measure the height of this building. Right, that is going to be your final assessment. Not that you'd necessarily be able to do that, but right, I want you to use your trigonometric knowledge and measure the height of this building. Go. So, a student would have to know that they need to construct a right triangle. One of the legs of which is going to be the side of the building, and then how do we construct a triangle using the rest of this? Okay, well, we'll have to get a device that can measure the angle. So, for instance, an inclinometer is something that we used at some point, and then when you look through, the piece of this inclinometer, it tells you what angle this is tilted at. So one of the ones we did was you basically tie a rope around or in the little hole in a protractor, because that's totally what that's meant for. And then you put a weight on the string, a little nut or something like that, washer, tie it off, and then you hold it up so that you're looking along the edge of the protractor to the top of the building, and then you read where the string is hitting the protractor, and then depending on the kind of protractor you have, it may be the complement of the angle, but you discuss all of that in your solution to doing this. And then you have to take into account the fact that this is at this height, not from the ground. So then you have to measure, okay, where am I holding the protractor? What height is that? Add that to the distance that we get from this particular point on the building to the top of the building. And, oh yeah, by the way, we also have to measure from us to the building at eye level, because that might also be different at foot level. The ground may not be level. So there was all sorts of stuff that they had to do. This was not the final assessment. We did this as a project. But it was an interesting project. It did not always work. We can discuss later. All right, take a 3-minute break. Everybody walk around, get stretched, cycle your water, do what you need to. See you back in 3. Thanks so much for coming. Look, if nobody else is going to do it. Alright. Dost thou in hoist? So we go with 20-pound weights and just do some general curls and extra little exercises until I feel like stopping. Or if we get close to failure, then usually I'll bump down to the 15s. Hey Math Dork, how's it going? Welcome on in. Do you have any favorite teaching philosophies? Or philosophers? We were just discussing Howard Gardner with his multiple intelligences and Nell Noddings' critique on liberal education with a mind toward increasing the amount of care that's spent in or increasing the amount of care that's being taught in schools. I believe one of the salient phrases that I hadn't actually read out loud was that teachers should be more in the business of teaching students how to get care and then later on how to give care rather than so much focusing on academics, at least to the level we are still doing 33 years on from the publication of that particular book. Yes. It only really works if the class sizes tend to be, you know, not 30. My community college had hard limited our classes at 24, at least allegedly. For the most part, they did. Also depended eventually on which math classes they were, because we did have a couple that got to be, I want to say like 35 to 40, but they were taught in, you know, lecture halls all the way across campus, and these were the more general education type ones that like general education ones that they could actually, I don't even know what the rationale was, quite frankly. I think they looked at other schools and were like, well, they're doing it, so why don't we do it? So our dean pushed really hard in order to not get larger class sizes, but you know, in most cases, you can only do so much. Oh. Pride and Prejudice, 11/11/05. That was the Keira Knightley one. That was actually after we came to Maryland that fall. Yeah, so the yeah, I mean, right? Like, we know that. um, the president was mostly just going at it from like these people are only going to take this one math class anyway, so what does it matter standpoint. Not really paying attention to the fact that many of these people had been working at their math requirement for multiple years until they got to college algebra, or whichever one it was, probably college algebra. Teaching Mathematics for Social Justice, NCTM, by Anita Vaga and David Stinson. This is one that I think this is one that I actually bought at NCTM. Yes, 2012. Also a common trend, yeah. Learning to Teach for Social Justice was a book that I had bought for one of my classes, probably educational philosophy again. That is one that's back there. Right now it is holding up a couple of notebooks, so. So this is a series of conversations with teachers and trying to understand like how all of this works. And again, because it's NCTM, this is mostly focused on mathematics education. Introduction, Part 1, A Sojourn into the Empowering Uncertainties of Teaching and Learning Mathematics for Social Change. Whoa. So, subheadings, the meanings of teaching mathematics for social justice. What exactly does that mean? In teacher education, social justice is emphasized as a part of teachers' overall diversity or multicultural initial preparation or professional development. More generally, social justice is often found in the mission and vision statements of educational organizations, i.e. K-12 schools and colleges of education, in the overarching goals and objectives of education associations and conferences, and titles of special issues of scholarly journals, as well as in the titles of an increasing number of books. Given this increasing presence of social justice and the title of this volume, one might expect to find a definition of teaching for social justice, or more specifically, a definition of teaching mathematics for social justice in this introductory chapter. We, however, provide neither. Similar to North, 2006, who resisted presenting a delimiting, unifying theory or definition in her review of substantive meanings of social justice, the intent of this volume is not to limit, but rather to provoke more questions to stimulate new discussions about the many meanings of and possibilities for teaching social justice. They go on to talk about from critical theory to critical pedagogy. Some readers may find it unsettling that we have resisted providing a definition of teaching for social justice. But we thought it important to reach back both theoretically and pedagogically to the roots, providing a brief overview of critical theory and critical pedagogy. origin of critical theory is often associated with the Frankfurt School circa 1920s, which holds a Marxist theoretical perspective to critique and subvert domination in all forms. As these critiques, originating in the social sciences, evolved, they became known collectively as critical theory sometime during the early to mid-20th century. Bowles, 1971-77, in his study provided a comprehensive yet condensed explanation of why U.S. schools remain unequal, both between and within schools. Through a critical historical class analysis of schools, he outlined 4 components in U.S. education. Schools evolved not in pursuit of equality, but rather in response to the developing needs of capitalism. As the importance of a skilled and educated workforce grew, so did the importance of maintaining educational inequality in order to reproduce the required class structure of capitalism from one generation to the next. From the 1920s to 1970s, the class structure in schools showed no signs of diminishment, and the inequality of schools had its roots in the class structures that it serves to legitimize and reproduce. Oh. String trees to sea. That's interesting. Huh. My chat got behind on my other computer. That's weird. Beyond critical analyses of how schools function or the intersectionality of race, class, and gender, the significant influence of critical theory within the context of education has been and continues to be on the ongoing development of critical pedagogy. Rooted in a democratic project of justice and freedom, critical pedagogy supports pedagogical theories and practices that drive both teachers and students to acknowledge and understand the interconnecting relationships among ideology, power, and culture, and the social structures and practices that produce and reproduce knowledge. Rejects any claim to objective universal truths. New theories and languages of critique and resistance examine and transform social and pedagogical practices that maintain unjust social codes. In varying degrees, tenets of critical pedagogy are found in historical and continuing legacy of educators from the early 20th century, e.g. John Dewey and W.E.B. Du Bois, to the 21st century, Michael Apple and Bell Hooks, who have labored to advance democratic ideals within education. Critical pedagogy as a pedagogical movement in the United States could be said to have its origin in 1970 when the 2 essays by Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educationalist and inaugural philosopher of critical pedagogy, were first published in English translations in 1970. These publications coincided with the release of the first English translation of his seminal book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Something of an event, quote-unquote. Shawl. These translations, as well as the totality of prolific writings, have securely positioned Freire not only as the inaugural, but also as the most influential education philosopher and theorist on the development and practice of critical pedagogy. So he's also mentioned a bunch in the yeah, he's also mentioned a lot in Bell Hooks' work, Teaching to Transgress. which also talks about Freire and also his particular version of, I can't remember which one it is. It's either sexism or racism that he just like goes off on, and Hooks is like, yeah, that's unfortunate. So we have to take that into account, but trees, steer, tears, stare. Are we playing one hen, two ducks, three squawking geese, four limerick oysters? Part 2 looks at the historical development and theoretical perspectives of critical and social justice mathematics. Conversations are historical development of critical mathematics education. That's an interesting typo. Critical mathematics education, a dialogical journey. Beyond math content and process, proposals for underlying aspects of social justice education, and reflections on teaching and learning mathematics for social justice in urban schools. Part 3, teacher education and professional development, does Beyond Apples, Puppy Dogs, and Ice Cream, preparing teachers to teach mathematics for equity and social justice, because equity and equality are not the same thing. Challenging beliefs and dispositions, learning to teach mathematics for social justice. What about a class dedicated to teaching students how to learn? Yeah, so in theory, that is what I had a class in study skills in 5th grade. Might have started in 4th. I think it was 4th, 5th, and 6th. But study skills had a bunch of, like, let's explore how your brain works, but at an elementary school level. So it wasn't like, let's think about how your actual physical brain works, or let's think about psychology. It was more like, you know, in order to learn things, you need to repeat things, and in order to really understand something, you should be able to explain it back. Here's how to take notes properly. There was a bunch of stuff. I don't remember any of it now because it was 30 years ago, but 30 plus years ago. Oh. Imaginative memory, space reading, focus mode, diffuse mode, and chunking. Yeah, some of that was done. And certainly a lot more of it needs to be done. If we want to actually engage the students, then we need to get them to understand how to learn. And Noddings is absolutely correct in the sense that there are many children out there who do not have the capability to learn, not because they're unintelligent, but because of outside factors that end up hurting them. Whether they're dealing with trauma and abuse, whether they're dealing with, hunger, any sort of issue at all whatsoever can get in the way of their learning. And so we have to absolutely get in there and start thinking, like, what is it that these children need in order to open them up, in order to be able to learn in the first place. So, Noddings has that 100% correct at that point. And then, once we get that system of care in, our kids go to a school where the older children are buddies to younger children to help them figure out how to do stuff in order to get them to like connect into a larger community. They start talking about, you know, how they're doing, and I mean, this is also a fairly affluent area-ish. And so, like, a lot of the problems that would exist in an inner city school, like even just London, will not exist here. Right? The population density is fairly low comparatively, and the, you know, wild disparity exists, but not quite as much. It's not as pronounced. And especially if we're talking like at this particular school, right? It is this particular school is fairly well off and caters to people who are fairly well off. We are on a program with the government, so they pay up to a certain stipend in terms of where your kids are going to go to school. Is this teaching mathematics for social justice? Teachers' conceptions of mathematics, classrooms for social justice. Sorry, mouth just amount of crazy watering. And valuing the process, working with teachers around mathematics for social justice. Part 4, teaching mathematics for social justice in the classroom, breaks into numbers count, mathematics across the curriculum, toys for boys, challenging domestic violence using mathematics, 5 things you should probably know about teaching mathematics for social justice, and teaching mathematics for social justice, the end of when are we ever going to use this? Just out of curiosity here. Ginny C. Powell from Georgia State. Yeah, Georgia State University. When I received the invitation to contribute a chapter to this book, my first thought was, that sounds like a book I want to read, but I'm not qualified to be in it. You see, I'm not a teacher for social justice with leading capital letters, such as the following people, who are also quoted or have conversations in this text. I mean, I wish I could think of myself like that. I do consistently try to inject socially relevant topics in my teaching, and I strive daily to engage students in capital C critical thinking, i.e. in the Freirean sense, but the reality is that I don't do things as often as I would like or should. On too many days, my teaching, unfortunately, is more about getting through the curriculum and the day rather than creating better citizens. When I told this to the editors of this volume, they said, well, write about that. Hard to teach abstractly without a context, yeah. And that might be a thing, is that, like, we just all need to take a day or two to, like, discuss how notes should be taken, and in fact, right? That's in here. Like, teach the students how to take notes in this very different way. And when notes should be taken, yes. And I think Liljedahl says specifically, like, they should be done at the end of the activity and as like a refresher as far as what you have been doing for the last hour or whatever. And the same thing that we've discussed many, many times, you don't do literally word for word a transliteration of what is on the board. You want to summarize it for your own brain, which is going to help your own brain remember things. It is not for anybody else. It is not for right. Recognizing when you need to take notes versus when you just need like a couple little reminders here and there. You don't need to do whole examples. Once I began teaching students at the college level, I thought it would be easier to find topics that the adult student would find relevant. After all, they have more life experiences. Giroux, 2010, argues experience is a starting point, an object of inquiry that can be affirmed, interrogated. Sorry, when it was hyphenated, I wanted it to be emphasized somewhere else. Interrogated and used to develop broader knowledge and understanding. But although adults may have more life experiences that they can bring to the conversation, they also have more things they have made their minds up about, such as they're bad at math. Our culture has a definite bias against mathematics. No one would dream of saying that they can't read as though they were proud of it, but people often say that they're terrible at math and laugh unconcernedly. Mood. Oh. So many people. And, as Tim Minchin says when he was doing his slam poetry called Storm, I definitely recommend this, by the way. Go watch that one. Might be a little harsh, I guess, but yeah, Tim Minchin did a slam poem called Storm, in which he gets more and more agitated as the dinner party goes on, and this woman, Storm, decides that she is going to... Storm? That's a weird misremembrance if I did. I think that's right. Hang on. Yes, it is Storm. This dinner party goes on, and she keeps talking about BS philosophical points, mostly that, you know, well, what's even truth mean anyway? And he's just like, and both the host and his wife at various points looked over and are like, So at some point, he of course lets her have it, and it just feels like that kind of moment, that snarky like, oh yes, do you read as well? Um, do you hate reading? Is also like a very super snarky thing that you probably shouldn't say at a dinner party, but you really feel like it's warranted. Do you like being illiterate? Whew. um, and then the Bell Hooks book that I got into. There we go. I got... okay. Less than half, but more than a third. She mentions so much really good stuff in this book. So, Teaching to Transgress, it is all about like the cultural issues with kind of your standard teaching, and also like what has shaped the landscape of teaching through the years. So she says that she was actually she started school back when they were still segregated. So like almost all the teachers at Booker T. Washington were black women. They were committed to nurturing intellect so that we could become scholars, thinkers, and cultural workers, black folks who use their minds. We learned early that our devotion to learning, to a life of the mind, was a counter-hegemonic act, a fundamental way to resist every strategy of white racist colonization. Though they did not define or articulate these practices in theoretical terms, my teachers were enacting a revolutionary pedagogy of resistance that was profoundly anti-colonial. So, obviously, she does not endorse segregating students into groups, but like some of the point of integration was that they would stop this like revolutionary teaching in the background and could intentionally harm black students into, you know, existing within the framework of this, you know, racist, white supremacist, colonialist ideology. And yeah, there are places where I get a little hot under the collar because yikes. The realizations that came with reading this book, or even, like I said, the first roughly half of it, I have dog-eared a rather large number of pages. So we could pop through a couple of these, but again, they get pretty spicy. To fulfill the mission of taking black children who were deemed exceptional or gifted, being given special care, these teachers made sure that they knew us. They knew our parents, our economic status, where we worshipped, what our homes were like, and how we were treated within our family. So, like, this holistic, taking the entire child and trying to understand them as best as possible in order to nurture that particular student. Now, I grant you, the teachers were not trying to understand every single student, or at least they tried, and then those that started falling off, they were like, well, I'm going to do what I can, but, you know, got to help the ones that are going to especially excel. Again, 1960s. She starts talking about Freire, Thich Nhat Hanh, and the philosophy of engaged Buddhism. Baltimore County, yup. I worked in Baltimore County. I did 1 year. Although I will say I was around northeast Baltimore. So, that particular suburb had a very heavy, well, I mean, it was mixed, decently evenly mixed, population of black student body and everybody else. And, like, only certain students were the ones who were really snarky about it. Because a lot of the students who were in those particular 4 classes that I was teaching, right? So this was 2006 to 7. Yeah, 2006, 2007. So they would have been graduating in 2007, 8, 9, and 10. Right, so the students who were in those 4 years really pushed hard because they wanted out. They did not want to get stuck, not necessarily geographically, right? They didn't want to physically escape necessarily. But a lot of them said, I want out of this, like, box that I'm trying to get put into. And a lot of them knew that education of some level was going to be the key. So they didn't have to, you know, be rocket scientists, but they had to, you know, at least have decent scores in everything so that they could go and become social workers or go do community organizing or, you know, actually become rocket scientists or, you know, do all the things, nursing, right? Do whatever it was they wanted to do. They knew that they absolutely had to excel beyond the box that they were trying to be shoved into by their peers and by teachers even, and the community, whether that be their parents or, you know, those kids over there who are like, psh, school, get out of here. Like, I had a senior who, like, absolutely did sweet FA the entire semester, and I failed him. And his mother came storming in and was like, what, you know, what business is it? Or no, it wasn't, no, not what business, but how is it that my student failed this badly? And I was like, I mean, he's got like a 39% average, so... And she was like, you know, why didn't I get a call anytime that, you know, he wasn't doing his work or blah, blah, blah. And I was like, here's the number I called. She looks at it and she goes, that's his phone number. I was like, I'm going to give you 2 a minute. Just stepped outside. So I come back in and she's like, all right, so how are we going to make this work? I'm like, I mean, and she's like, I mean, if he has to go to summer school, and I was like, it's probably the best bet. Can give you options, but because she was like, he is not, you know, spending another year in school because that's just not going to happen. I'm like, well, it's not like he had a 58 and we might be able to figure something out and fudge numbers or make him do an extra project or something. No, no, no. Yeah, like a 39. Nope. So, yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh, uh, engaged Buddhism is the focus on practice in conjunction with contemplation, similar to Freire's emphasis on praxis, action and reflection upon the world in order to change it. So Freire was primarily concerned with the mind, whereas Thich Nhat Hanh offered a way of thinking about pedagogy which emphasized wholeness, union of mind, body, and spirit. So, you know, Buddhist philosophy naturally, thousands, well, yeah, 1,000 years old or whatever, trying to get people to do this whole, not whole body exactly, but like holistic learning of training the mind, the body, and the spirit in all of the aspects that you can. You train the physical body to take care of the body, the physical needs. You train the mind by doing all sorts of exercises, thought experiments, philosophy, and then you train the spirit through doing acts of kindness, through contemplation, meditation, all that good stuff. I've taught many brilliant students of color, many of them seniors, who have skillfully managed never to speak in classroom settings. Some express the feeling that they are less likely to suffer any kind of assault if they simply do not assert their subjectivity. They have told me that many of their professors never showed any interest in hearing their voices, accepting the decentering of the West globally, embracing multiculturalism, compels educators to focus attention on the issue of voice. Who speaks, who listens, and why. Caring about whether all students fulfill their responsibility to contribute to learning in the classroom is not a common approach in what Freire has called the banking system of education, where students are regarded merely as passive consumers. Since so many professors teach from that standpoint, it's difficult to create the kind of learning community that can fully embrace multiculturalism. Students are much more willing to surrender their dependency on this banking system of education than are their teachers. They are also much more willing to face the challenge of multiculturalism. I've never forgotten the day a student came to class and told me, "We take your class, we learn to look at the world from a critical standpoint, one that considers race, sex, class, and we just can't enjoy life anymore." Looking out over the class across race, sexual preference, ethnicity, I saw students nodding their heads. And I saw for the first time that there can be, and usually is, some degree of pain involved in giving up old ways of thinking and knowing and learning new approaches. And I respect that pain. And I include recognition of it now when I teach. That is to say, I teach about shifting paradigms and talk about the discomfort that it can cause. Right? So a lot of this stuff ends up being hard. So you have to, make all these considerations and thoughts about how exactly are we going to decenter the kind of standard narrative that we have in our culture, whereas at the same time, you know, not make anybody feel like bad. Trying to understand new paradigms is difficult and hard and sometimes literally painful. Hooks is having a conversation with Gloria Watkins. Oh. Oh. Gloria Watkins is her birth name. I forgot about this. Right. So she has a conceit wherein her, you know, official persona, Gloria Watkins, who is her again, birth name, sometimes goes and has a little dialogue, and this is a narrative contrivance, if you will, of her kind of speaking with herself as it is, whereas Bell Hooks is her, like, book personality. So here, you know, the Gloria Watkins side of her says, there are many readers of Freire who feel that the sexist language in his work, sexist, went unchallenged even after the challenge of contemporary feminist movement and feminist critique, is a negative example. When you first read Freire, when you first read Freire, what was your response to the sexism of his language? Bell Hooks. There has never been a moment when reading Freire that I have not remained aware not only of his sexism, but the way that he, like other progressive third world political leaders, intellectuals, critical thinkers such as Fanon, Memmi, etc., constructs a phallocentric paradigm of liberation, wherein freedom and the experience of patriarchal manhood are always linked as though they are one and the same. For me, this is always a source of anguish, for it represents a blind spot in the vision of men who have profound insight. And yet, I never wish to see a critique of this blind spot overshadow anyone's, and feminists in particular, capacity to learn from those insights. This is why it is difficult for me to speak about sexism in Freire's work. It is difficult to find a language that offers a way to frame critique and yet maintain the recognition of all that is valued and respected in the work. It seems to me that the binary oppression that is so much embedded in Western thought and language makes it nearly impossible to project a complex response. Freire's sexism is indicated by the language in his early works, notwithstanding there is so much that remains liberatory. There is no need to apologize for the sexism. Freire's own model of critical pedagogy invites a critical interrogation of this flaw in his work, but critical interrogation is not the same as dismissal. So, in this, we need to engage with the ideas, the thoughts that these people put forward, whoever they may be across the world. Take the good with a big old asterisk next to it that says, hey, this is not particularly a good take because, and then go on to explain why. And as she says here, in Freire's work, he's seeking to liberate all people, but he does it from this rather sexist, as she states, phallocentric standpoint, where, like, you know, the liberation of men is thought to be the superior tack to go with. Or, you know, the men are the ones who are doing the serious conversations in the room with their cigars and alcohol. And here we critique my own stance. We get called out. Now, you know, the point really is that, again, we need to look at all of the structures of power, at all of these particular takes that all of these people, and that includes ourselves in the current time, that includes ourselves in our past lives, this includes all of the philosophers in prior times. Again, filter out the good stuff and the wow, yikes, that's quite awful stuff, and discuss them both. Don't just ignore or censor the bad. I actually saw this earlier on somebody who had somebody was critiquing the this work contains items which may not be suitable for all audiences, and it was made within the era it was made. So with that understanding, please, come to the conclusion that this film is as it was intended, is being shown as was intended, and it may have some, stuff in it that's not great. A bit, a bit yikesy, if you will. Right, so a bunch of people said, like, oh yeah, I saw this on a Looney Tunes thing. It says, these were made in the time that they were made, and please understand that not all of this is acceptable anymore. And somebody had posted something that said, effectively, oh my god, Gen Z and their, hyper woke snowflake, whatever. And somebody was like, no. You see, this is anti-censorship. This is saying we're not going to censor this. We're going to show you exactly as the authors or whoever had intended you to see this. However, we want you to know that we don't agree with this. It is a bad take. It is literally terrible. Do not perpetuate these particular stereotypes, structures of power, what have you. Okay. So we're going to go for another 3-minute break. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We will be right back. Go stretch, cycle that water, do an exercise, what have you. And we shall return in 3 minutes. Thanks so much for coming. As per usual. We're also going to do a particular form. Alright, I'll embarrass myself. We'll do one from Tang Su Do. This is Nianchi 1. I think, probably. So it starts with your typical tension downs and then goes ouch, that is not there. Ridge hand followed by an elbow smash. Man, yeah, I definitely don't remember this. Damn. Mistake. Maybe we'll just do a different one if I can't find my notes real quick. This happened to me a couple of months ago as well. No, that's education stuff, right? Yeah. My biggest problem is that it is now, I believe, missing its front cover, and is not that green one. Alright, let's try it again, see if we can remember. Go like this. We step out. There are 4 movements. Yeah, alright. I have to pull it up online. Alright, we'll make it up. We'll do a black belt form then. Maybe both of them. Nope. Man. There's one. Only screwed up a couple of times. So that is Shinte. So we start with a tension coming down with, like, it's basically either a block or you're coming up like between somebody else's two arms and like grabbing their arms and pulling them down and apart. When we make it down here, we do a double block, which is, that's down there. To do like a block of something coming at us from up here, and also something coming at us at our leg from down here, and then it switches to go that way. And then here we do like a cross to up block, tension down there, and then yeah, I'm supposed to make this bigger so you can actually see it. Hey. Oh, that's unfortunate. Come on now. You're supposed to see me. Come on, man. That's a little better. Anyway. Cross block here, go to there. Block, block. Block here, come down. And then from here, we go to the right. We do an up block punch, up block punch, up block, and elbow smash. It's supposed to be essentially like an uppercut with your elbow. Alright, and then we turn this way, do a down block, and then Fugo Sudo, and then we advance, do a Fugo Sudo, and then an aggressive Chonko stance down block. Then from here, go to a guard, you do a front kick, and then grab somebody, whirl them basically off their feet here, step and throw, grab somebody else, whirl them around this way, step and throw. And then we go to an eye poke, and we go 2 this way, which I don't have room for. And then we come around here, 2 this way, and then we do a cross block like smash, which usually goes down to, oops, oi, like down to someone's leg, and then pop back up into this like dual chop, come back in, do it again this way, and then right side up block punch, up block punch, up block smash, back tension, and then Jumbi. Okay, second black belt form. Bus side eye. So we go tension up, across, reinforce block this way. Then we do inside out blocks, turn, double uppercut, and then we kick back to here, and we do double blocks this way, which falls into a, what's over there? I want to say it's an inside-out block on this one too, but that feels a little weird. It may very well be a chop. It may very well. Yeah, no, it's got to come from under and do something that way. All right, then we take this, we step back into a Kima stance, which is also known as the horse stance. We do a tension across, and then we do a chop, punch, chop, punch, this is a fist, but it comes out kind of like from here out. And then we reverse and do chop, chop, punch, fist. And as we go, we're trying to generate power from our hips. So it gets a little challenging here because something like that. And then we do Fugal Sudos up until the third one, at which point we brush parry. And from here, right, brush parry into sort of a block up top. We step back with our right foot, and now the right foot comes up, and we do a side kick. And then down into a down block. We come up, and we chop the opposite direction. And now we... Is this the right section? Starting to sweat. This might not be right, actually. Hang on. We come off of... Yep, there we go. So we come down into a Fugal Sudo going the other way, and then we only do one, and this time we go into a double up block and pop up onto our toes, at which point we use that momentum to fall and do a double hit onto like the floating ribs, and then take another quick step and do a punch to the sternum, and then we come back the other way. This is where we do our down block. That seems wrong. Is it this one, which we do in Keybon 4? Maybe. It's been a while for this one too. Come down. Ah, nope. Here we do a pierce. So we come off of here. There we go. Do a pierce to the groin. Rip up. Come around with a kick and do a down block. That's where we do the chop on this side. We do another crescent kick into it. Elbow smash, punch, and punch again. For effect. We come back up to here. Kick around. Nope. Come back from here. Stand up here. Do a punch. This is a dual punch. Come back. Kick. Another dual punch. Spin. Kick. Dual punch. And then here we come around. Generate power. I'm not jumping as high because I don't want to slam on the floor. All right. How much I do on any given night depends on how I feel. So yeah, we totally went. How long? Totally went almost 15 minutes. That's all good. Thank you, Cesar. I've only been working on it for 17 years. It should be better than that. But I will say I have been doing Eskrima and Tai Chi also for the last year. Or rather, I've been doing Eskrima and Tai Chi officially only for the last year. Tang Su Do is at this point just going to be something that I keep up, and then eventually when we get back to the States I might get my black belt.
I have a feeling that they're going to be like, you've certainly improved. If only you could remember your forms. um, also from 1994. I don't know what it is about this era of educational writing, but apparently I like it a lot. Oh, right, and the other one. really comes from the NCTM, National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, which is mostly focused on K-12, but being a National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, it doesn't actually specify that you have to be in K-12. Anybody who teaches mathematics is welcome to join the organization as a professional fellow. Although usually you have to be attached to a school in order to complete your registration, or at least the first time, something like that. I usually ended up with a lot of NCTM journals, but unfortunately a lot of them were, I found out, like, basically if you didn't have a large, if you didn't have like a large grant, you probably weren't going to get into the actual, like, articles section, which is kind of a crappy way for it to work, but I can understand, like, they want to mitigate all of the random things that end up getting past, you know, the first couple of levels of editorial process or peer review. If it's something that is just sort of like anecdotal, you know, they don't want to they don't want to have too much that gets through on that basis. Just because it sounds good doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Although, to be fair, right, just because it has a large grant budget does not mean that it is a good study. Right, and then the last little bit here, Gloria Watkins. So you see no contradiction in your valuing of Frere's work and your commitment to feminist scholarship, Bell Hooks. It is feminist thinking that empowers me to engage in a constructive critique of Frere's work, which I needed so that as a young reader of his work, I did not passively absorb the worldview he presented. So, again, it is reasonable to still use the foundations of his work. Just put a little asterisk on there that says, yes, I recognize that a lot of this stuff is not really going to work in today's society because he does have particularly sexist views, but at the same time, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's still good stuff in there. Freire declares in Learning to Question. If the women must have the main responsibility in their struggle, they have to know that their struggle also belongs to us, that is, to the men who don't accept the machista position in the world. The same is true of racism. As an apparent white man, being Brazilian, because I always say that I'm not quite sure of my whiteness, the question is to know if I'm really against racism in a radical way. If I am, then I have a duty and a right to fight with black people against racism. And one last little bit here. Bell Hook said, whenever I tried in childhood to compel folks around me to do things differently, to look at the world differently, using theory as intervention as a way to challenge the status quo, I was punished. I remember trying to explain at a very young age to Mama why I thought it was highly inappropriate for Daddy, this man who hardly spoke to me at all, to have the right to discipline me, to punish me physically with whippings. Her response was to suggest I was losing my mind and in need of more frequent punishment. Now try to imagine what it must have been like for them, each of them working hard all day, struggling to maintain a family of 7 children, then having to cope with one bright-eyed child relentlessly questioning, daring to challenge male authority, rebelling against the very patriarchal norm they were trying so hard to institutionalize. It must have seemed to them some monster had appeared in their midst in the shape and body of a child, a demonic little figure who threatened to subvert and undermine all that they were seeking to build. No wonder then that their main response was to repress, contain, punish. No wonder that Mama would say to me now and then, exasperated, frustrated, I don't know where you came from, but I sure wish I could give you back. Imagine then, if you will, my childhood pain. I did not feel truly connected to these strange people, to these familial folks who would not only fail to grasp my worldview, but who would just simply not want to hear it. So, when I was doing some of my last couple of semesters, I would, because I was also reading this, now granted this is a year and a half ago, over a year and a half ago, oh man, yeah, that's like 2 years. Because I was reading that at the time, I would sometimes flip open to one of these quotes and like literally read it out in the beginning of class. And some of the students really appreciated it. The ones who didn't, like actively did not appreciate it, I think were few and far between, but did not say anything. The last one that I the last one that I read there, wherein Bell Hooks is describing like violent oppression of her, the outspoken rebelling child, I could definitely see several people nodding along with it, like this is something we've heard before, or it was done to me. And this stuff was in the 1960s, and like we're in the 2020s, like most of these kids were born around 2000, so it was just wild to have that kind of experience. But the main thrust of it was like to try and get students to see like the whole culture needs to shift, the whole culture needs to change in order for us to truly understand the educational tasks that are being set before us. This is not going to just be something that you are going to sit down and passively accept while I just say stuff out loud, because it's never going to work that way. Hey, Famished. So what we had discussed was basically how is it that we're going to kind of break free of everybody's static thinking, and that did not just include them, it also included me. How do we get past all of this, like, I just want to shut down and I want you to give me the questions and then give me the answers and then give me some more questions and give me some more answers. Like, that was not how we were going to do things. And saying that out loud by reading, literally reading from this book, was something that I think was necessary for those classes in particular. Okay. I also read some out of Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl, who came up with a number of ways in which we can affect change in our classroom now we get to the meat and potatoes, right? Educational philosophy. In short. But there's so much that we are, entirely talking about here. This copyright was 2021. Probably the newest educational theory book that I actually picked up. This was 2022, November 22 when I picked up this book. So it had already been out like a year, give or take. He did a talk at the AMATIC, American Mathematical Association of Two-Year Colleges, annual conference, which was in Toronto, Canada. And I was sitting in the audience, and I was like, we have to go to this keynote speech, because everything else shuts down, right? There is nothing else to do anywhere. They want everybody to come to this thing, which of course they do. They paid for this guy to be there. So like and so I pulled out like a stack of homework and I started correcting it. And then he started talking, and within 30 seconds I had stopped correcting papers. Within about a minute I was fully engaged, and within 5 I was scrambling to shove all that back into my bag and pull out my notebook, in which I then drew like a main idea in the center and then started doing sub-ideas around the side, and I went, oh no, I'm doing a mind map. And this is something that like our 9th grade world history teacher had taught me to do, and I was like so against it at the time because I was like, this is so pointless. I don't understand what... Yep. That was how I naturally organized my information when it actually counted. I was like, oh shit. I know, but I had like been complaining about them for decades, and then my mother, I took a picture and sent it to my mother, and she just started laughing so hard. She was like, I told you that was gonna... I'm like, fine. Don't tell Mr. Smith. She was like, hell no, you are. Okay, so for Peter Liljedahl, we're going to have to actually draw some stuff and get some ideas going, because this is going to take some doing. But in addition, this is also super important, because this is not only just like some nice philosophy about math teaching, this is actually practice. And like, how do we actually effect change in the classroom by doing this procedure? And why do we do it? Just focusing on finishing and plan to revisit, dig deeper in psychology and world civilizations. Yeah. Yeah, and like, this is a really good place to explore a lot of that stuff, because like, we could just chat for, you know, we've been going for 2.5 hours here. Like, we could go for 6. I mean, not that I'm going to go for 6, but we could go for like 6 hours and nobody would really care. Like, there's nobody who wants this room, right? There's nobody who expects me to have done other work, except like feeding my family. But you know, it's basically 1:45 in the morning at this point, so like, who gives a shit? Nobody cares. We can talk as long as we want, and we can talk quite frankly, because I'm not gonna get fired. Okay, so the impetus behind the research that he was doing, he started doing research on like teaching methods specifically in the mathematics classrooms, and he was trying to get a handle on like, what is it that is going wrong? Why are we losing so many students to just disinterest? And so he was trying to look at what were called studenting behaviors. And this comes about from Fenstermacher, 1986. So Fenstermacher comes up with this idea that there are these studenting behaviors. Students are expecting to perform as a student in the classroom.
There's more to Spotify than meets the ear. That's because video is taking center stage on Spotify, with over 300,000 video views.
So he wants to know, you know, what is it that what are we looking at? What is this entailing? What do students believe that they should be doing? And so, Fenstermacher says there's so much more to studenting than learning how to learn, which is really what we want, right? So teachers want students to learn how to learn. students want, at least often, students want to learn often how to get good grades. Okay, so actually let's create a bulleted list here. So they want to learn 1, how to get good grades, 2, how to socialize, right, with the other people who are in their class, with the other people who are in their school at large, with the teachers, right? Because, you know, where do you fit in this grand scheme of things? It's also important in a student's life to figure out where they fit. Right? How do we deal with parents and adults that are in our lives other than at school explicitly? Right? How to deal with non-academic parts of school. And later on, he says in 1994, kind of going on further to explain that students also want to figure out how to psych out the teachers. Beat the system. Deal with boredom. And particularly deal with boredom so that the teachers don't notice necessarily, especially if it's something that's, you know, against our social contract. Negotiating writing assignments. Right, threading the needle between curricular and extracurricular activities, determining what's likely on the test and what is not. So we went into this looking into what is it that students do in a learning setting, some of which is learning and a lot of it is not. And he said, okay, studenting appears to be kind of like the primary angle at which we want to look at this to see, again, what is it that the students are doing and not doing, and like how can we improve learning outcomes by trying to figure out studenting behaviors. So Liljedahl said we can research studenting within a number of activity settings within the math classroom, The activity setting is a discrete and well-defined activity within a lesson. So, again, what is it that you're doing? You're physically doing within the classroom in order to get the students to try and learn something. What is the activity? So, activity settings first researched were what he called now you try one, where the student or the teacher will do the problem on the board and then expect, here's a new problem, now you try one. Right? Pretty self-explanatory. Once you've been in a math classroom ever, you've seen this happen. So now you try one tasks, note-taking, and homework. Presents results from note-taking and homework in chapters following. Here we get the now you try one tasks results. So, for example, we may be demonstrating to students how to multiply two-digit numbers, and after we have thoroughly explained this and done 2 or 3 examples, we may turn to the students and say, now you try one, as we write up the one we want them to try. And now we wait for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, which is the average amount of time teachers give students to do one of these tasks before we go over how to do it. Then, in many cases, we give the students another now you try one task. In my visits of aforementioned 40 classrooms, now you try one tasks were a foundational and central part of every lesson observed, and for many of these teachers were part of the fabric of what it means to teach.
Nothing could have prepared me for the high-stakes heartbreak that surrounds me. You want me, you won't let me go. So I burn slow. I can feel you coming like a wildfire. I'm just the fuel, baby, you're the lighter. If I'm not careful, you'll burn right through my soul. Burning like a wildfire,
Right, so typically, do examples, give students a new one, wait 4.5 minutes as downtime, go over, and repeat. When I asked these teachers to tell me what student behavior they expected to see during these moments, the answer was always the same. I expect my students to try it on their own. Question, for what purpose? Teacher, to see if they can do it and learn from their mistakes if they can't. What we expect students to learn from it and to try it. Now you try one tasks are a type of self-assessment where students and teachers learn whether demonstrations were a success. This is pretty straightforward. So what did students really do? What are their studenting behaviors during this discrete and well-defined learning setting? Well, it turns out that some students behave exactly as we expect, but only approximately 20% of them. The rest do not. In a study into studenting behaviors across several different classrooms, we found an array of behaviors. For a deep analysis of psychology behind these and other studenting behaviors, see paper by Allen, 2017. We can do something with that later. Array of behaviors during the Now You Try One activity setting. If you see if you recognize some of these. So, I got called out really hard during one of these, so see if you can figure out which one it was. It's not going to move. Okay. Students typically. performed. Group 1, slacking. They made no effort to start the problem, attempt the task at all. Instead, they spent the entire time looking at their smartphones, talking to other slackers, or literally doing nothing at all. When interviewed, it became clear that the students who slacked either didn't know what was going on or didn't care. Now, it does not mean that all of these students didn't care. It's that some of them may have cared a lot, but they just had no idea what to even start with. So they were just like, eh, and just did something completely different. Again, in some cases, literally nothing. Number 2. Stalling. Like the students who slacked, these students did not attempt the task. However, unlike slackers, these students filled the time with at least legitimate or legitimate-looking off-task behaviors, like sharpening a pencil, getting a drink of water, going to the bathroom, endlessly looking in their backpack for some vital piece of equipment. When interviewed, these students told us that they either didn't know how to do the question or knew that if they just waited a few minutes, the teacher was going to go over it anyway, so why bother? Read over something once or twice, highlight the important parts, read as many times as you need until you understand it, highlighting the part so you can explore further down the road. Gemini works wonderful to create quizzes based on questions they give me. All right. As much as I dislike AI and all that, that is at least an appropriate use for it. So thank you. Alright, so again, made no effort, did off-task actions, sharpen a pencil, go for a water break, etc., did not know how to start, or knew the teacher would just do it so that they could copy it down. And use your tools properly, yeah.
With over 300,000 video shows and 300 million
And I mean, that's important, right? Is to sort of like wean yourself off of it so that you're not dependent upon it the entire time.
Show of your own? Upload your video to Spotify. Use Reframed
Um,
and monetize your content.
I'm still like toward the end of a book right now by Peter F. Hamilton called Salvation, in which they use um, AI tools on basically what is, Google Glass or whatever. Um, and it really gets interesting in the ways that they're using it because in this fictional world, I grant you, um, they have a uniquely tailored AI that is like on their particular they call it an alt me, so alternative me, which then like is their assistant. It's as if it were a different person, and also it is individually tailored to them. It is contained within their alt me is contained within their device, or like it uploads to their home server every day or two or whatever to make sure that it is learning properly. But it is not affected by the corporation. It is tailored to them specifically. And like the ways in which they use it is pretty unique and interesting. And it's not at all like what we're seeing now, where it's just like, I'm just gonna let it do everything. I need to see some of those Kyle Hill videos again. First of all, great voice. 10 out of 10, no notes. Ow. Alright, group 3, faking. So some students pretended to do the task, but in reality, were doing nothing. A lot of students don't even know how to get started at all. Yep. Hand a ton of homework and they struggle on where to start. Biggest thing was to take the Pomodoro technique, study 25 to 40 minutes, take a 10 to 15 minute break. After 4, you take a longer. Don't even need it. Yep. Get started easily, study a ton of hours straight. I would recommend that you start telling this to people because, like, if it works for you, it's gonna work for somebody else. Right? And if you're like, look, just do it slow, start with small amounts and things like that, then eventually you're going to work yourself up into it. It's like weightlifting, right? You don't start with the 75 on each side and just be like, yeah, sure. You're going to hurt yourself. Similarly, don't study 2 hours at a time. It's not going to work. Just try and study for, like you're doing, yeah? Like, set a timer for a half an hour. Do it seriously. And then once you got that, take a break. Sounds great. So here, for the fakers, what we have is legitimate on-task behaviors that are masking no progress. Right, and they give exactly the same reasons as the stallers. They don't know how to start, or they knew that the teacher was just going to go over it anyway so that they could copy it. So they just do these legitimate on-task behaviors. So for instance, looking at the board, flipping pages in the textbook, thinking but really just doing something else, or pretending to write something on their page. Right, so flipping pages, totally thinking about the actual problem that's there. Checking the board examples. Whole bunch of stuff that they could be doing. But no progress is made. No real attempt is made to do any work at all. Right, next group is mimicking. So the mimickers do genuinely attempt the task. But here's where the mimickers are different from people who literally just do it. Those who are mimickers are trying to find concordance between the examples and new exercises. So all they're really doing here is they're looking at the examples, they're looking at the new exercise, and they're saying, can I literally do this the exact same way as the thing that the teacher showed me how to do? And if they don't, if there is no concordance between these things, they get kind of stuck. Now, it doesn't always have to work out that way. This part absolutely called me out, 100%. Right? That's little Obi. Absolutely a mimicker, 100%. I flipped back in the book to the examples page. I looked at the examples that were there, and then I tried to do the problem almost exactly as the other one said. Now, I could find a lot better concordance than a lot of my peers could. I was just better at mimicking. And also, I knew sort of what I was doing. But I would not, unless I was confident, I would not go through and be like, well, I don't really know what to do, but let's just try something. Right? And that's really the last group, is the just try it group, which we're going to get back to after break. Ads are going to come here in just a second or two. So, see you in 3 minutes. Be right back. So the students basically want a recreation of the examples in these new exercises. 100% of that problem in the new exercise. Or following the exact same roadmap, right? In the interviews, teachers explicitly stated with emphasis that students were not expected or encouraged to mimic the teacher's process. They do not want students to mimic what the teacher is doing. They want students to work it out and figure out what it is that they need to understand about this particular lesson. What is it about your brain that you need to kind of get out of your own way for in order to make sure that you understand something, truly understand it. However, and ironically, 100% of mimicking students said that they thought their teacher wanted them to mimic them. So their idea was that seeing the analogous example prior to this "now you try one" is an invitation to mimic the teacher's work.
Massive barbecues, colossal ice creams, wasps the size of blimps, but nothing compares to Paddy's big summer spin.
All right, so just try it is the last group they had. And the point here was that these students just started.
Head to the app, complete the challenges for your chance to win. Winners are announced every Friday until the 1st of August. You'll always get another chance with Paddy Power Games. Opt-in required. Players must wager minimum £10 and spin Paddy's Wonder Wheel each week to qualify. Games and eligibility restrictions apply. Further T's and C's apply. 18 plus. Gambleaware.org.
Nope, stop that. Don't want to get a YMCA claim. Okay. Upon receiving the assignment to try one of these, the students just started working. They didn't look back for another example. They didn't do whatever. They just tried it, right? Wherever they were at. Some got it right, some got it wrong, but the main thing was that they just went for it, and they were checking their understanding and then going back. All right, checking understanding and getting feedback. Right, and see this one is the teacher's actual intent. That students just look at this thing, be like, all right, let's try it. Work on it a bit, and if they don't really get it or whatever, then they can talk with their peers, they can ask the teacher a question to try to understand where it is that they're going wrong. Right? This is what teachers intend for students to do every time that they're working on something. And if anybody needs to change their behavior now would be a good time to do it. So, in a class of in a class of 32. A full 17 students were mimicking. Six of them, which is, you know, approximately 20%, just went ahead and tried it. 4 were stalling, 3 were slacking, and 2 were faking. So 3 stalling again, or sorry, 3 slacking were doing literally nothing. The 4 stalling and the 2 faking, so 6 students in total, about 20%, were either stalling or faking, and so they were doing something in order to just wait out the time that they were supposed to be working on the problem, but not actually doing anything. Again, 17, pretty much half the class, was working on trying to copy exactly what the teacher had done, just on this new problem. And again, six students, 20%-ish, just went ahead and tried it. Okay, we've got a problem. We sort of know how to do it. Let's try, regardless of whether or not we actually know. And Liljedahl says, when I combine the studenting data for Now You Try One tasks with the studenting data for note-taking and for homework, if any was done in class, along with data from other activity settings, a clear picture emerged for exactly how much non-thinking behavior was present in a 1-hour lesson. In a typical 1-hour lesson, 75 to 85% of all students in the class exhibited non-thinking behavior 100% of the time that they were in class. That should be a bit frightening. The rest of the students exhibited non-thinking behaviors for basically all but 8 to 12 minutes of the class. So this became the baseline data. The baseline from which he was hoping to make some improvements. Alright, so we start looking at, like, why does any of this exist? So the one main idea is that we have institutional norms. So what is it that a student expects that they should be doing based on the culture in which they exist? And most of the normative structures that permeate classrooms in North America and around the world are so robust, so entrenched, that they transcend the idea of classroom norms and can really only be described as institutional norms. Norms which have extended beyond the individual classroom and even the school building, but have become ensconced in the very institution of school itself. Much of how classrooms look and how much of what happens in them today is guided by these institutional norms, which have not changed since the inception of the industrial age model of public education. Desks might look different. They've gone from blackboards and green boards to whiteboards and smartboards, but students are still sitting, teachers are still standing. And although there have been a lot of innovations in assessment technology and pedagogy, much of the foundational structure of school remains identically the same. So, he worked with over 400 K-12 teachers for the next 15 years, starting from when he was in, again, graduate school, and working through a lot of his professional doctorate and then postdoc work. Okay. Well, sorry, the alert popped up that the ad is starting. But I was like, no, we just did that. Okay. So in each of these schools that he visited and everything like that, he worked in teams of 8 to 18 teachers in 2-week cycles in order to deliberately break institutional normative structures and see whether it could increase student thinking. The goal was simple: try to increase the number of students thinking and try to increase the number of minutes during which they are thinking. In essence, we wanted to improve the baseline data. We were willing to break any and all classroom norms in order to make that happen. Our only restrictions were that we could work within the confines of the classroom and within the confines of the set bell schedule. Other than that, there was no norm we were not willing to turn over. To illustrate an extreme example of how far we were willing to go, early on in the research, I worked with 8 teachers who taught for 2 weeks in classrooms without any furniture. None. At first, student thinking increased, and radically so. We have more students thinking and thinking for longer. Despite this positive result, however, I also learned that teachers don't like to teach in classrooms without any furniture. I wrote a little note here, now I don't even know what it is. This realization was important and formed a structure for much of my research going forward. There's no point in researching a practice that teachers are unwilling to implement in the first place, irrespective of how positive the results are. This constrained the scope of what we were willing to try in the classrooms. This is not to say that we were not willing to push into spaces that were uncomfortable, but there were limits on what was reasonable. The third thing that I learned was that results often came before explanations. And I wrote a note here for myself that this is generally true for a lot of research. Zach can probably attest to that. This remained true for all research and continues to be true even for today. Knowledge of what works preceded an understanding of why it worked. As a researcher who is used to starting with theories and then testing them, this was new and exciting territory. In the case of no furniture, for example, it took many months of interviews with students in different contexts before I began to even get a glimpse of why having no furniture influenced student thinking. It turns out that when students walk into the classroom that looks like every other classroom they walk into, they assume that the lesson is going to go like every other lesson they've been a part of, and therefore they bring all of their usual habits and studenting norms into the classroom with them. If those studenting norms are non-thinking behaviors, then they are not going to think in that lesson either. When the students walk into a room that looks very different, then they leave their habits and norms at the door and allow themselves to be different, at least to begin with. The reason teaching in classrooms with no furniture had an effect on student learning wasn't that, in itself, it promoted thinking, but rather that it didn't trigger non-thinking habits. And this gave the teachers the chance to make something else happen. Idea returned to later. So, with those 400 teachers, he then came up with a list of ways or things that we can change which might actually engender some sort of student change. And so, there became a list of 14 factors that improved student thinking. So, again, this is 400 teachers over 15 years. So we eventually worked out 14 factors that improve student thinking. 1, what types of tasks do we use? How do we form collaborative groups? Where do students work? How do we arrange the furniture? How do we answer questions? Where, when, and how are tasks given? What does homework look like? How do we foster student autonomy? So just get them to work on their own, keep them working on their own, or not necessarily individually, but how do we get students to not always turn to the teachers and ask them 100% for help or how to do it? How do we utilize hints and extensions? And extensions here being like additional tasks.
Hey Meta, how bougie is Jade Garden?
It's a trendy spot.
What's a colour that pairs with this top?
Consider dark
More
oak,
questions.
charcoal, or black.
What are some good first date topics?
Consider discussing favorite travel destinations or your
10, how do we consolidate?
Inspiration and answers from your glasses. Ray-Ban Meta glasses. Iconic style meets Meta AI. Click or tap the banner to learn more.
Or summarize
When your kid's favourite toy starts
the
to
lesson?
lose battery power, no need to worry. Your new batteries are already on their way, arriving today with Prime.
11.
Everyday essentials.
How do students take notes?
I'm Professor Huggington, and I like to hug. Cut-off times and T's and C's apply. See product page when ordering.
Hey Spotifyers, click or tap the banner to listen to Poolside Disco. Disco, house, funk and soul for the good times. Brought to you by
12.
our friends at TUI. Fly locally from over 20 UK airports to over 100 destinations.
How do we...
ATO and up to protected. T's and C's apply.
evaluate students. How do we use? Formative assessment. And 14, how do we grade? So these are the salient, like 14 individual factors that really mattered for Liljedahl in order to come up with any sort of meaningful response to the standard model. So how do we go about making any sort of sense whatsoever of this standard model in order to make it better? Like I said, over the next 15 years, all of these questions ended up being answered in, roughly speaking, the ways that are outlined in his book. So I'm willing to go through this, not tonight. It's already been 3.5 hours. It's like 1:40 in the morning. Because I'm totally going to bed. What are you talking about? But I'm willing to go over this next time on Wednesday or next Monday instead. So if anybody has any opinions on when, let me know. But we can talk about it on Wednesday. So for now, I think we're going to raid over to might be Casey Snow Art. Oh, yeah. Fizzbuzz has been on a while. Yep, it's going to be Casey Snow Art. Alright, so she is an artist, does awesome characters and things like that. She has been looking to get into the Twitch Partner program, so drop a follow, hang out, and just even lurk, and she will be highly appreciative. So we're going to head on over there, and I will see you all on Wednesday, provided I don't just feel like coming back tomorrow. So we'll see how things go. I've got some other stuff to do on YouTube and whatnot, so there's a good chance we'll just keep it for Wednesday. And like I said, we can work on building thinking classrooms on Wednesday, and or do actual math problems. Depends on what everybody wants. So, see you all next time. My name's Obi-Wan Pez. This is N Simplex Pachinko. See ya.